Okay, good afternoon. Let's get started here. We have our workshop agenda tonight. We have 3 items up here. We're going to start off with building community resiliency. Merina, all yours.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present our Human Services funding update for 2022. The agenda does give us about 45 minutes for this. I think it'll probably be more like 20, depending on the number of questions and just discussion that we end up having. This presentation is very similar to the one that we gave to Parks and Human Services Committee a few weeks ago, so I apologize to those of you who have already been through this once, but we wanted to present it in that group ahead of time and then get full council feedback tonight. So just as some background for anyone who is not familiar, our division manages and distributes funding from local, state, as well as federal sources, really with the intent to just positively impact the lives of Kent residents. Our staff works in partnership with the Human Services Commission to strategically align those investments across programs and funds to maximize the impact in our community. Community engagement plays into all of our funding decisions. So conversations with nonprofits and community leaders are ongoing. We do them in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they're very formal and include things like surveys, consultant-led work. We also have small group feedback sessions. We meet regularly with nonprofit providers and community leaders in one-on-one situations. And then we also have listening sessions. And that feedback is used to inform our work overall. So it was used to design and identify the priorities in our strategic plan. And it also helps us just on an ongoing basis really identify the gaps in services as well as in our funding. And then just because we did this recently, I thought it would be interesting to include a community listening session that really kind of rose up from the community that they asked us to participate in recently, and provide some of the themes that came out of that. I don't want to go through it item by item, but that listening session included leaders of our nonprofit agencies in Kent, both kind of mainstream and grassroots organizations. And some of the things that they identified as current challenges included the need to strengthen our nonprofit sector. So there's a lot of challenges happening in that area right now in terms of being able to pay livable wages for their staff. So they're having hiring challenges and difficulty keeping staff on board. The volunteers that they've depended on for ages are worn out and tired and burnt out, and they need to really increase the access to volunteers in our community. They want to do more resource pooling, build better connections with each other, build capacity, and do more cross-referring amongst programs. The other theme that continued to come up, we hear a lot about the need for community facilities. Unfortunately, that's not something we can do a lot about in our division directly, but there's a real strong desire for those community gathering places, sharing office space, sharing reception and administrative staff, and more variety in terms of community center models. The third theme was expanded program offerings. They're seeing a lot of increased need for housing stability, for youth programs, especially those who've been disconnected during the pandemic. Youth mental health, counseling, food security, transportation were all themes that are really critical to nonprofits right now. And then just some general comments in terms of centering needs of the community when we're looking at this work. Our Human Services Strategic Plan, just as a reminder of where we kind of started with this work, it guides our work and prioritizes key areas for funding, and this was all, again, based on community engagement and input. Council members were a part of that process. Our commission was a big part of that process. So we use a good start, healthy aging, individual and community well-being, and stable housing as our primary key priority areas, and then there are, of course, some subcategories underneath each of those. So we're basically here to talk to you right now just because 2022's funding and landscape is a lot more complicated than it has been in the past. So we have a lot going on, and we just wanted to make sure that council was well aware of where we're at and kind of where we're going. So In even years, we have our Human Services General Fund process. So 2022, we'll be going through our process to allocate funds in 2023, 2024. So we do this every even year. Our commission is a huge part of that. We do it in tandem with 16 other jurisdictions. So this is the Human Services Funders Collaborative, where we have the online application system called Share One app. So you're all familiar with that. And as part of that, we also have our CDBG public service funds. And then also this year, if you'll recall, in the last budget cycle, council allocated the Opportunity Fund. It's a pilot project. It was $100,000 that will be used kind of for emerging needs, like outside of that standard application cycle. So, you know, when we're allocating funds, you know, 2 years out, it can be really hard when there are needs that pop up or new organizations that are doing really critical work, or if there's just like intense need in the community that we don't have any funds that are free to be able to allocate to that. So the Opportunity Fund is a pilot for this year, and it's 1 year, one-time funds. We also have 1590 funds that we're tracking. We have Arpa Building Resiliency Fund, and then we have our ongoing contracting, reporting, and monitoring. So again, this is our normal general fund per capita and CDBG public services funds. If you add those two together, it approximately totals up to 1.2 million. And right now we're kind of at the tail end of the pre-application process right now. We have been doing work with our commission. We've been kind of going over our strategic plan, getting ourselves set up for this process, doing a lot of pre-application work, both with our funding partners in the other cities and also with our nonprofit partners. And then we have training coming up for staff and commissioners that's really grounded in that equitable grant making and implicit bias recognition. And then we have application workshops for the community that will happen in mid-March. I think they're the 15th and the 16th. In terms of the grant making with an equity lens, we have listened to the community and some of the challenges that we've had in the past. So we have really increased our opportunities for technical assistance. We do that kind of in partnership with our other cities, but also specifically for programs applying to Kent and doing some different things. So there are actually videos that will be available for those who are applying for funds this year. If somebody has challenges related to budget, like there's a series of 5 or 6 little videos that'll be available. So for people who need a little extra help, if they don't want to come to staff, they can watch the videos. Continuing to look for innovative partnership opportunities. I already mentioned the training for commission and staff. Other things that we've done, we included equity prompts in the application review process to continually check ourselves if we're comparing two organizations, really making sure that we're asking the important questions about why would we not fund this one, why would we fund another one, and then just prioritizing the community-led and informed work. As need has shifted to South King County, sometimes we get a lot of primarily Seattle-based organizations, sometimes East Side-based organizations that are doing work in Kent now. They're serving Kent residents, but they're not actually embedded in our community, and they might not have partnerships with the other organizations, or there might be organizations in Kent that can do that work, but you know, we have a lot of, it's kind of a good and a bad. It can be great because we need the needs here. Some organizations do great work, and it would be valuable to have them here, but we also have a lot of really strong organizations already here that can do that work. So we do prioritize agencies that are already here, and also organizations that recognize and address the disparities in our community and also have representation that reflects that. This is just a quick application draft timeline. I'm not going to go through it, but the application actually opens on March 14th. We have application workshops on the 15th and 16th. There's one in the morning and one later in the day. And then the application is due April 28th. And so at that point, it shifts to staff and the Human Services Commission to do their work. And we're basically extremely busy from now until mid-July. This is just kind of a outline of what that process looks like. Only applications that are submitted through this formal portal are reviewed by the commission. We have a review team that includes staff and commissioners, and this will be our second time including community members in that review process that are non-voting but maybe represent different interests or expertise that we don't have on the commission. We get well over 100 applications now, and our commissioners used to have to read fully half and then the other half, so that's a lot to ask of commissioners. So we try as best we can now to limit the number that they have to review like super in depth, but having other people participate in that helps with that process. And then the commission makes the recommendations and they are voted on and submitted to council for final approval as part of the budget process. Back to the Opportunity Fund. Again, these are one-time funds, and we have $100,000. This was that fund that was designed to be more flexible. Some of the things that we would consider are much smaller grants than we typically provide. They won't be, the intensive reporting and tracking that's required as part of our normal per capita funding. So we anticipate that we will be able to help provide support to more grassroots organizations and some of those community organizing events, building people's voices. It should just be something that's a little more flexible and able to address those emerging needs. So we are excited about that. We think it'll help build relationships and support people that are doing really great work, but maybe are too intimidated or too concerned about applying for the regular Human Services Funding collaborative funds. So it's a good stair step into that process. We used to have a pilot program similar to this, so we're hopeful that we can use some of those lessons learned and make this Opportunity Fund very successful. We're still in the process design. We talked with the Parks and Human Services Committee about this a couple weeks ago. We have considered, whether or not we want to release RFPs, potentially 2 during the course of the year, or just keep it open on a rolling basis, which, admittedly is more in line with what the funds are designed to be used for. And so that's kind of where we're all leaning at this point. So interested to hear if anybody has feedback on that. That also allows us, if we see a need in the community, we could do like a very narrow RFP and say, hey, we're seeing this happening, and kind of do a quick turnaround RFP to help address a need. Again, we intend to use a review team that's comprised of community members, staff, and the commission. And then we would divide those review teams based on the number of applications. Commission would be the final approval point for those funds as well. 1590 service dollars. We don't have the final amount available. If you'll recall, this is the 0.1% sales tax that was approved back in 2020. And 60% of that funding has to be used for capital, and we still intend to pool that with Hsip. We do have that 40% that can be used for services. It's pretty narrow in focus. It has to be related to the mental health, behavioral health treatment programs, or housing-related services. Those service dollars going forward, starting this year, are going to be supporting the KPD mental health co-responder model, which is something that we are very supportive of. It helps our division as well. We definitely see the value in that, but there are funds that kind of collected last year that could be used for programs this year. And then once we get a good handle on that co-responder model budget, there might be additional dollars. So we're just kind of trying to plan in advance and think through what we might be able to fund with those funds. So we have a couple of ideas. We've need to do some work to shore up the Catholic Community Services Community Engagement Center, which some people just call the day center. There's an opportunity to fund some case management services for some emergency housing voucher recipients. Those were federal vouchers that were distributed that have to be kind of outside that normal Section 8 process. And the agencies that accepted those vouchers have to provide case management. It was mandated, but there was no funds associated with it. So we know that we need to help out with our agencies who are serving Kent residents with those vouchers. So that was one opportunity. And then if you'll recall, council dedicated some 1590 funds to youth mental health. Last year, well, we funded them this last year. And that was really successful. And we continue to hear that that's a huge need. And so our hope is that we continue to provide some of that type of funding and potentially expand it to the adult realm. Again, nothing is decided in terms of this because we have various buckets of funding available. So trying to figure out where the best fit is something that we're still navigating. Again, we're a little bit off on our process with that because we had those funds that were sitting for a year. So ideally going forward, what we would like to do is fold that into one of our normal application cycles, just for the sake of staff time as well as our agencies. It's, as much as we can combine these applications into one, that would be ideal. And again, we'd like to use a similar process in terms of our review teams and where those recommendations happen. And then we get to Arpa building resiliency funds, which we have $1.7 million over 5 years. We continue to learn about these funds and what they can be used for. We just yesterday got the new compliance and reporting guidelines that came out in a almost 50-page document that I'm still kind of rushing through, but you've probably started to hear those referred to as the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. That does not roll off the tongue. I know, I still call them ARPA. Those have to be spread out over 5 years, and they have to be spent by 2026. And the Treasury requirements are governing our project eligibility when we consider where we want to spend these funds. And unfortunately, the recipients are accountable to Treasury for oversight of the sub-recipients. So it's almost for us like having another CDBG grant for all intents and purposes. We have to follow all of the 2 CFR 200s, so we have to really focus in on agency capacity to manage these funds. They're not going to be easy. There are not going to be very many agencies that currently have the capacity to take on these funds. So internally, we're just trying to really think through how we're going to be able to get the funds out there and still be creative with them. We'll have to look at some of those kind of sub-recipient, subcontracting relationships so we can make sure that the funds are getting out where they need. We do have intention to hire staff within our division to help us with the contract management and compliance oversight. And then as much as possible, we're working with other departments and divisions within the city, other jurisdictions to look at opportunities to align and leverage and get the most out of those funds that we possibly can. Challenges, as I said, the Treasury guidelines, it's going to be a difficult process to get those funds out the door and monitored and just make sure that we're in constant compliance. It's a lot of work. We're very used to it in our division with the CDBG fund, but we did lose our CDBG coordinator recently, so we don't have that expertise built in right now. We're going to be dependent on hiring. And then, the reporting and monitoring will be something that we have to do ongoing. In addition to our human services staff capacity, there's also that challenge with nonprofit agency capacity. So as I mentioned, there's really not that many agencies in South King County that are very willing and able to take on federal funds. They have to have a robust staff and ability to manage those funds on their side. And then, there are multiple cities that have ARPA funds. So we could end up in a position where we're all trying to throw funds at the same programs, and they're not going to have the staff capacity to manage it either. So we're just going to have to be very thoughtful about where we do that and how we partner. And then, again, monitoring for gaps and duplication. There are a lot of funds out there, not just ours. There's also going to be Best Starts for Kids funds, other federal funds, state funds. So we want to make sure that we're really putting our funds where they're most needed. So really checking closely for duplication and just making sure that we're looking for gaps so that we can make the most of our funds. This is similar to what we kind of, were hoping to do back when we first approached planning for building resiliency. So really investing in key priority areas to support like equitable recovery in the community, and then focusing on improving long-term resiliency. There's been a lot of kind of those Band-Aid style funds out there. And so we were really trying to kind of pivot and program our funds more towards building that long-term self-sufficiency in our residents. So thinking about like wraparound system of care, housing case management and navigation. So one of our thoughts there is, we generally fund multi-service centers to do our eviction prevention. Can we hire a Kent-specific case manager there? So we're not just giving rent assistance, we're really focused in on, okay, we had to pay your rent and that's great, you're going to stay housed. How do we keep you housed? How do we keep you from needing rent assistance again? Is it higher quality childcare? Is it counseling? Do you need wage progression in your job? Like, what else can we do to ensure that you stay stable in your house? Employment services, access to apprenticeships, internships, that wage progression model again, different types of job training. Youth supports are going to be very critical going forward. We really have to ensure that we're tracking how our youth are doing, making sure they have access to after-school programs, working through some of those community violence interventions, reaching our disconnected youth, because there are a lot of disconnected youth right now, and then financial assistance style programs to build assets. So credit repair, budgeting, cash management, how do you reduce your debt, how do you get quality credit, things like that we haven't done a ton of in the past, but all kind of focused on that long-term self-sufficiency. This is just an example. When you look at the 1.7 million, we kind of wanted to show it on screen, how that could potentially play out. We have this idea that it makes sense to front load it to get the funds out the quickest to those who need it, including kind of earmarking or set-asides. So the rest of it would be through a regular application process, but understanding that things might come up. There might be things that we can fund in tandem with other cities, kind of just trying to maintain some set aside for special projects. Again, this is nothing set in stone, just something that we wanted to put up for you to see and get your feedback on. And that's really the gist of what we're working on this year. There's a lot. We are understaffed. We have our senior CDBG planner position open right now, and we've gotten very few applicants. So I'm a little bit concerned about that going into an application cycle with all of this layered on. But if you have feedback that you're hearing from your constituents that you want to share with us to ensure that we're considering as we go into all of these different funding cycles and scenarios, we would love to hear it. By all means, people can email us, call us. Hopefully we'll get a really good turnout in our upcoming application cycle. We did have a session already for agencies who have never applied for funding. That was countywide, but that is also recorded, and we're going to make sure that as we hear from people who haven't applied it, that they have access to that video. So if you're hearing from agencies that aren't on our mailing list or want to have conversations with us, we're happy to sit down and talk with anybody anytime. We have technical assistance that will be set aside, but we'll also happily meet with people. And that's it, unless you have questions.
Great presentation, Merina. And what a great service that the city offers, right? I'm hoping people is aware and know what a great program, and there's probably a lot we can do to try to help promote this here, but really a great program for people who may need a service. One last question, I'll go to my council member. So the Arpa funding, did you get a lump sum, the 1.7 million, or do they spread out, giving it to you over 5 years, and then you allocate it out?
I think we'll have it all fairly upfront. I actually don't know that. That'll be a question for finance. I think, yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I can look it up, but we intend to try to space it out over. over the years.
Okay, good. Okay. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Council President. Very good presentation. Thank you, and I appreciate the inclusive process that you're going to be bringing in members of the community, not just the committee members. And I wanted to find out the mental health, well, first of all, do you happen to know Hsip? Does Hsip have a committee member now, at least one, who has lived experience being homeless, for instance?
Not on the executive board, but we are building the advisory board, and I believe there is someone on, Maryl's shaking her head because So we're building in the advisory committee that will have representation from a variety of different experiences, and if you wanted to.
The advisory committee is up and running. I think they're on maybe their third meeting now, and yes, that's the point of that committee, of that advisory committee is there's members with lived experience in both homelessness and the need for affordable housing, as well as service providers, so very much input from the community.
Excellent, thank you. And then I was glad to hear you mention that there's still a need for mental health supports, not only for the youth, but also for the adults, and important to remember that it needs to be culturally appropriate mental health counseling. You know, I would guess that is part of what made the youth money a big success. So thank you very much. Great news.
Agreed. And Derek did just share with me that the 1.7 is fully available now, so we can spread it out or use it sooner.
Just curious, with that money, I mean, we're not going to use it. It got to be spread out over 5 years. I was wondering, Paula, will that money go into that investment fund between the time we utilize it?
Wow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What's so funny now, that council member?
That's a good question.
Okay.
To kind of tap on really quickly to Councilmember Fincher's comment about the mental health funding is a lot of our agencies are now hiring mental health to embed in their programs, which is great because that is serving people who already happen to be there using services, which helps kind of reduce some of the stigma, just makes it a lot more accessible for folks. So that's something that we're watching really closely and looking for opportunities to help support too.
Good. You know, the recognition that talk therapy is not the only kind of therapy is important if we really want people to be well and heal them.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've definitely kind of focused in on those less traditional forms of mental health. That was really what worked for the youth mental health in particular. So, yeah.
Councilmember Lummer.
Yeah, great presentation again. Question on the correspondent.
Is your mic on?
My bad. Thank you for the presentation. Great information as always. Question on the mental health co-responder model. Mm-hmm. When is that expected to launch? And this may be, maybe this is just a topic that we need to ask for a presentation on public safety, but I'm just curious where we're at with the whole program with KPD and
I would have to have Derek or the mayor.
Okay, fair enough.
It's great.
You can phone a friend.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The Police Department is putting together a request for proposals for that program as we speak and expect to have that out on the street this month in March. So the program is moving forward. There is now a designated sergeant reporting to a commander, and so all of those pieces are starting to come together.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, Councilor McCoy, sorry.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Merina, for the great presentation. Just a quick question about community engagement piece that you had. There was a bullet point in there for community gathering space. Are they not considering like YMCA or senior center as a gathering place, or do you have information on what exactly?
Yeah, I think part of what it is we have a lot of organizations that really want office space and don't feel like they can afford it on their own. There's a lot of desire to share kind of the administrative staff, anything that they can share to help make it more cost efficient. But yeah, we do have community center models in Kent. We have the KPA, we have after school, we have different things. I think that what they're looking for is, places where they can hold events and community dinners and share kitchen. There's a lot of different ideas, but it's just something that we hear a lot from. And while I don't feel like there's a lot that our division can do, we definitely recognize it. And so what we can try to do is, get people together talking amongst each other and to look for those opportunities. But yeah, I mean, there's creative ways to do it that doesn't entail having to build an entirely new building. I think we all know the capital cost associated with that would be pretty.
The reason I ask is because initially when we were working on the Y here in Kent, that was the conversation we had with the Y and our nonprofit organizations to have a community space in there in kitchen for these organizations to kind of have their events and gatherings together. So maybe it's something we need to emphasize and revisit.
Definitely.
In our community.
Yeah, and there is a kitchen coming online that hopefully will be able to be used by multiple organizations. There are things that are happening. It's just a theme that we hear often, and I wouldn't be accurate in my representation if I didn't share it, but I think that it's something that we can continue to work on that might not be exactly the model that they are hoping for, but definitely can make progress in those areas.
Councilman Lummer, you still have a question?
Yeah, I was just curious if there's some sort of intersect, here with Economic Development Department on, we have a lot of vacant spaces.
Yeah, that
some way to set up almost a WeWork type model in that shared admin model they're looking for in available.
Yep, and that came up in that meeting as well. And we actually refer folks to Bill Ellis quite frequently when they're looking for space, and he has a great relationship with a lot of our providers. So I think a lot of them are comfortable talking with him. But yeah, more to come on that for sure.
Any more questions? Okay. Merina, good job. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Okay. Let's move on to our next presentation. This is going to be for the 2023-2028 Transportation Improvement. Shivani?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me over here. I'm here to present the 2023-2028 Transportation Improvement Program, which is an annual requirement update by Washington State Growth Management Act. A quick overview. I will provide an overview of the 6-year Transportation Improvement Program, highlight community presentations and interdepartmental collaboration, showcase completed projects, update project change, update new programs, and the next steps. The 6-year Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, is a short-range planning document that is updated annually based on the needs and policies identified in the city's comprehensive plan and adopted Transportation Master Plan. A major update of the Transportation Master Plan was adopted on March 2nd, 2021. Projects moved from the Transportation Master Plan to the Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP, as priority projects and grants and other funding sources are identified. During this presentation, just to keep the short range planning and long range planning separated, I'll refer to TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, and then Transportation Master Plan where the projects are coming out of. The first 3 years of the TIP, projects have reasonable expectation of receiving funding. The funding for the later years are less certain. This year's Transportation Improvement Program has minor updates since last year's adoption of the Transportation Master Plan. All projects from the last year's TIP is moving forward this year apart from the completed projects. Staff from Public Works, ECD, and Parks collaborated to develop the current 2023-2028 TIP. Projects that were completed in 2021 will be removed. Project timelines were reviewed to strategically position the city to apply for available grants, and new plans were recommended to be added to this based on the interdepartmental staff working group. Community engagement is an important process in the undertaking of the TIP. I had the privilege to present some information on funded projects at the Kent Rotary Club beginning of the year on January 25th, followed by a presentation at KPAB, and then just yesterday I presented at the Land Use Planning Board. Completed projects, after projects are designed and constructed, projects are removed from the TIP. I will now walk you through the projects that will be completed by end of June. And then this really is a moment to celebrate the staff effort and cities completing these infrastructure projects that's making available for our residents and guests to utilize. First up is the West James Street at 2nd Avenue Pedestrian Crossing that offers residents and visitors a safer way to cross the street. This project was 100% funded by Sound Transit. That is a beautiful road. That is the South 212th overlay project from 72nd Avenue South to 84th Avenue South. I particularly like this picture because you can see the traffic coming in. But the South 212th Street is an important corridor. This is a significant route for transit, freight, and commuters. This project was partially funded by Puget Sound Regional Council's Preservation Grant. Next is the Willow Street Shared Use Path Project, funded with local funds. They'll be completed this spring. This project adds to the beautiful 4th and Willis roundabout gateway, welcoming residents and guests into the city. The pathway will offer residents an attractive walking surface to connect to nearby businesses, amenities, and the downtown core. Two projects, the South 212th Street and East Valley Highway intersection, and the South 196th Street to South 212th Street, East Valley Highway pavement, were combined into one project this year. By combining the project into one, this will reduce traffic impacts as well as construction cost. As economic success in Kent continues and our population grows, new programs, projects will be added to each year's TIP update. These programs, plans, and projects will come from the adopted Transportation Master Plan. During the development of Transportation Master Plan, public outreach process, a study was identified to re-envision Central Avenue. The city will complete a study of Central Avenue from SR 167 to Willis Street to develop a vision for the future of this corridor. The study will look at transportation needs, including bike and pedestrian needs, to promote economic development based on the future of this land use plan. Greenway Plan is a citywide plan to create a bike boulevard and greenway routes on local and low-volume streets with signage, marking, and traffic calming as needed. This plan has been identified in the Transportation Master Plan as well. Staff will continue to work with, staff will present at Public Works Committee in April, followed by public hearing on May 3rd, just before the council on May 3rd. Council may take an action on May 3rd to approve the TIP before the 31st deadline, June 31st deadline. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Councilmember Larmer?
Yeah, thank you. Could you go back to the Greenways plan? I wasn't quite, like a little more explanation on that.
So,
There's outside traffic noise, so
no worries. So this one is a plan to create bike boulevard and greenway routes on local low-volume streets and with signage, marking, and traffic calming as needed. And that's just an example of one of the.
okay, so is it mostly residential and it's bike paths?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fincher?
Thank you. Would you tell us a little bit more about that study of Central?
I just give me 1 second. Thank you. I am going to ask Rob to help me with this one.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I will be happy to answer that. So one of the things that was identified through the public outreach during the Transportation Master Plan development was, excuse me, some re-envisioning or revitalization of Central Avenue between Willis and SR 167. And so this will be a similar process to some of our other corridor plans where we'll engage stakeholders, get community input, and kind of get their vision for what it is, what they want it to be, and then look how that will interact with what we see the transportation system doing in the next 20 years. So it could be any number of things, planter strips, sidewalks, more streetlights, things like that, lower speed limits, narrower lanes, any number of things to change the characteristic of the section. I take that back. Let me correct myself. We believe this may be re-envisioning Central Avenue based on the community input to lower the speeds from more of a high-speed urban arterial to more of a, maybe not all the way to a meeker standard type, but somewhere in between where it's a mix of non-motorized ped bike friendly and move away from that car freight centric, kind of accommodate all the modes, not just the vehicles. So hope that answers your question. All right, thank you.
Any other question, council member? Okay. Thank you, Shivani. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Next one is local road safety plan. Erik.
Good evening, council. Erik's going to get started. I just want to give a quick preamble. We've talked in past presentations, and I've discussed it in the Public Works Committee, that we want to make sure we're coming to council with our ideas, staff ideas on applying for grants. And so the punchline at the end of Erik's presentation is going to be trying to get feedback on level of comfort from council on moving forward with a project list to apply the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant program, which Erik can explain, and he'll get into the details. But just as an overarching theme as you're listening, we're going to present a list, and we want to get kind of a thumbs up on moving forward with applying that list to the program.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Chad. So, yes, Council, I'm Erik, Preston, City Traffic Engineer. I'm going to present two very closely linked things tonight, Local Road Safety Plan and applying for those HSIP grants. So first we'll look at the Local Road Safety Plan. And so what is it? Well, I'm glad you asked. So it's a data-driven plan that uses a serious and fatal injury crash data and risk assessment to evaluate and prioritize Kent's roadways for traffic safety. And so we focus on the serious and fatal injury crashes because of Washington State's Target Zero initiative. Could I get the next slide, please? Oh, I'm sorry. I have to do that. I'm sorry. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So the plan update is required by the state every 2 years for these HSIP applications. So last time around in 2020, we funded 4 projects and received $1.6 million. And so I'll walk you through the individual elements of the plan. So WashDOT sets the guidelines for these plans as well as the required elements that I'll take you through. So one thing you will notice is that I use the word crash throughout the presentation, not accident. And the word accident makes crashes kind of easier to dismiss, as if no one was at fault. And so that can lead to unjustly blaming victims and things which obscures the serious nature of crashes on our roads. So that's why we use that more neutral term of crash. So we first start by identifying the top crash types using crash data that WashDOT provides to the city. We use their data in our analysis to develop the local road safety plan. And so we analyze only the most serious crashes and then select the most common risk factors. So I'll give you a little bit more detail about each of these steps. So our plan focused on the top 3 crash types, which accounted for 63% of the serious and fatal injury crashes in Kent. So there were 68 pedestrian crashes, which accounted for 1/3 of all serious and fatal injury crashes. These pedestrian crashes don't include bike crashes. Those are counted separately. 32 fixed object crashes accounted for 15.5%. Fixed object crashes are things like trees, fences, utility poles, utility boxes, mailboxes, things like that. There were 30 angle or T-bone crashes, which accounted for 14.5% of serious crashes in Kent. These are just the most common in Kent. Other cities might have a different top 3, but this is what the data showed. And so you might ask, well, why stop here with these top three? Well, WashDOT does recommend focusing on those top crash types. And we also have limited resources. But there is also a noticeable drop-off to number 4. So number 4 is angle left turn crashes with 8.7%. Number 5 are rear end crashes with 6%, and number 6 are bicycle crashes with 4%. So quite a drop-off. And so here we can cover a majority of the crashes and get a wide look at the city's safety.
A question for you, Erik. Councilmember Thomas.
Erik, on those, thank you, Mr. President. Erik, on those pedestrian crashes, 68 of them, how many deaths were there? Do you recall?
68. Can I look that up at the end? I do have that number. I can probably pull that for you.
If you don't mind. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So now that we've chosen our top 3, we analyze all of those serious crashes. We analyze them in a lot of depth. And so over 5 calendar years, from January 2016 to December 2020, we had almost 12,000 crashes in the city of Kent. Now, keep in mind that this does not include freeways like I-5, 167, parts of Kent Des Moines Road. These are only crashes on streets that the city of Kent owns, maintains, or manages. So if you average that out, that's over 2,300 crashes a year, or about 6.5 per day. One interesting trend that we saw in the 2020 data, due to the stay-at-home orders, was the total number of crashes dropped 25% from 2019 to 2020. But the number of serious and fatal crashes went up by 1 in 2020 compared to 2019. So people drove less, which gave more room for speeding. And so those higher impact speeds resulted in more severe crash outcomes, and this highlighted the importance of managing roadway speed and separating incompatible uses to achieve target 0. So really highlighted the importance of what we're doing. You'll see that there were 46 fatal crashes over those 5 years, resulting in 47 fatalities. There are also 161, before I go on, if you average that out, that is over 9 fatalities per year. That's 9 people who did not make it home. There are 161 serious injury crashes, resulting in 257 serious injuries. If you average that out, that's 32 serious crashes or 57 serious injuries per year. Although as an engineer, I would trade 1,000 fender benders for 1 fatality, by addressing these most serious crashes and these most serious crash types, we typically also reduce the total number of crashes as well. So now let's take a quick look at the most common risk factors. So these are just 5 of the most common risk factors that we see throughout the city and are a sample of the results of our analysis. Roadway width is a significant risk factor because of the distance or exposure both cars and people walking and biking have when you have to cross a wide road. 87% of pedestrian and angle crashes were on roads with 5 or more lanes. Traffic volumes are another significant factor. 95% of these top serious crashes were on arterials, which are our highest volume streets. Roads with posted speed limits of 30 miles per hour and above accounted for over 88% of our top serious crashes. We also saw a significant number of pedestrian crashes near bus stops. 57% of serious pedestrian crashes were within 150 feet of a bus stop. If you expand that window to 300 feet, you capture 71% of those pedestrian crashes. The surrounding land use also plays a role and can be a risk factor. Over half of pedestrian and angle crashes occurred in commercial areas, but fixed object crashes were more likely to occur in residential or non-commercial areas. So now I'll move on to the next element of the plan. Here we analyze both roadway segments and individual intersections to see where we have these risk factors, and we prioritize these locations based on those risk factors. So we analyzed 219 intersections on arterial streets and 123 arterial roadway segments, which are primarily the purple and red streets that you see on the map. This map is our roadway classification map, which highlights arterials, collector arterials, and collector streets in Kent. So after analyzing the network, we create a prioritized list of locations based on the rankings of three different measures that you see there on the bottom. So the first is total crash rate. This is simply the total number of crashes on a segment or at an intersection divided by the number of vehicles using the intersection over a 5-year period. This is typically expressed in crashes per million entering vehicles or million vehicle miles on a segment. The second thing we look at, that we rank, is total severity, or the societal cost of the crashes in an intersection or on a segment. So I do want to be sensitive and specific in how I talk about this, because you truly can't put a value on a human life. But we do need to understand the financial impact to society from severe crashes and put a value on that so we can understand how to make good investments in our system to create the most benefit. Societal cost is determined for the various crash severities by national data published by the Federal Highway Administration, and is the comprehensive cost of crashes of each severity. So these costs include things such as emergency response, medical services, market productivity loss, household productivity loss, insurance administration, workplace cost due to absences, legal costs, congestion impacts, and property damage as a result of crashes. The third thing we look at are risk factors. So we prioritize the locations with the most risk factors or the highest risk score. So using these rankings, we can move on to element 3, where we identify countermeasures and we develop projects and we prioritize those projects. When we develop projects, we look at spot locations as well as systemic projects. I'll explain this more in a bit. And we prioritize based on benefit to cost ratio, which is required by WSDOT. So let's first look at the countermeasures. And countermeasures are simply changes we make to the road or strategies we implement to improve safety. They can be as easy and simple as things like signs and markings and sharp corners, street lighting, guardrails, or road diets, RFBs, which are the flashing beacons like you see in the photo, or roundabouts. Crash reduction factors are developed by research and published in the Highway Safety Manual and related CMF clearinghouse. These factors tell us that this countermeasure reduces these types of crashes by this percentage. So it helps us in creating and calculating those cost benefits. After we match countermeasures to the location, we can start developing projects. So we can do it by location, like by an intersection, whether we do a roundabout or maybe improve a pedestrian crossing with a hawk signal or RFB. We can also look systemically to implement lower cost improvements over a wide area or multiple locations throughout the city. Things like curve warning signs, like you see the large arrow there on the screen. Also things like reflective signal backplates or even road diets can be applied systemically throughout the network. We also look at higher performing countermeasures like our hawk signals, RFBs, roundabouts, and road diets, and we can look for specific locations to implement those. So we prioritize on benefit cost ratio, like I mentioned, as directed by WSDOT. And so the benefit is simply that societal cost that I went over times the crash reduction factor. And the cost is simply the cost to build a project. And so we're looking for a benefit to cost ratio of greater than 1, hopefully much greater than 1. As an example, if we had a roadway segment with a $10 million societal cost and a countermeasure with a 50% reduction, that 50% reduction would give us a benefit of $5 million. And so if we had the cost of that project was $500,000, then our benefit to cost is 10 to 1, which is a fantastic investment in our system. So that's the plan. I'll switch gears and talk about the HSIP grant application. So what is HSIP? It is the Highway Safety Improvement Program. This year it is $35 million in federal money that is administered by WSDOT for city safety projects. That is up from $25 million 2 years ago during the last round in 2020. Projects are awarded in 2 categories, spot and systemic. And Kent was awarded $1.6 million, and that was roughly 6.5% of the funding last time around. The projects awarded were 3 road diets. One of those was 4th Avenue in the picture there, north of James, from James to 228. We had 3 road diets and 1 roundabout. So in this process, the city starts by completing the local road safety plan. Then in early March, those HSIP applications are due, along with the local road safety plan. Both are submitted to WSDOT local programs. And then WSDOT actually selects the projects from our prioritized list. So we give them a list of our priority projects, and they select from that list. Grant funds are then awarded in November, December timeframe. And last time around, in December of 2020, they selected the 3 separate road diet projects and bundled them together as one for us for the systemic award, and then the roundabout was awarded as a spot location. 2020, those projects awarded in 2020 are currently in various stages of design, and one of them is there on the right, the mini roundabout at 108th and 264th. And so no construction match is required if construction is obligated by April of 2023, and we are currently on schedule to meet that date. So let's talk about the projects we'll be submitting on this time around. So like I mentioned, spot location and systemic are the 2 categories. Again, looking for your feedback, so be thinking of that. But let's start with spot locations. So first, our access control projects. We've got 2 locations where those look like they would work really well. These score very well in the benefit to cost ratio. Simply put, this would use a curb and pylon system similar to what you see there in the photo. This is on James Street at the Ice Center. And so we would use that product or something similar that you see to restrict left turns in 2 locations. So first at Canyon and Wheeland, we would restrict left turns out of Wheeland onto Canyon. And then at 108th and 204th, we'd restrict left turns out of 204th onto 108th. Left turns in and right turns in and out would still be allowed. So our next group of spot location projects are road diets, which also scored very well. You'll see I have 2 sections of 4th Avenue listed that would complete road diets from James all the way down to Willis. And then at Willis Avenue from 3rd to Central. So on 4th Avenue, this would convert the 4 and 5 lane segments of 4th Avenue right out here to 3 or 4 lanes plus bike lanes. And so this could look very much like the photo below that you see of 256, where we have 3 lanes plus bike lanes. Could be something similar to that. The changes that we're proposing to Willis between 3rd Avenue and Central would convert the inside westbound lane to a 2A left turn lane. And then we could provide a pedestrian crossing, possibly an RRFB at 2nd Avenue to make it easier for people to get from that south of downtown neighborhood into downtown. So the next projects focus specifically on pedestrian crossings, which were some of our top, our top crash type. So 3 locations for pedestrian hybrid beacons. Those type of signals stop arterial traffic for walkers and bikers, as in the photo on the left, which is on West Valley Highway. We are proposing them on SR 99 around 248th or 250th near the Midway landfill, and on 2 locations on 108th. The first in the 20600 block, which would be near the Panther Lake Library, and then a little further south in the 21200 block, where we have an offset intersection and bus stops right there. We're also proposing rectangular rapid flashing beacons in 2 locations on 104th on the East Hill. One just north of 240th in that 238, 23900 block. And then another one between 244th and 248th. And so I'll show you a map of these, so this might make things a little easier to visualize. So the red circles are those pedestrian hybrid beacons or hawk signals. You can see we have one there on the West Hill on SR 99 and 2 north end of East Hill. And we have 2 RRFBs, which are the yellow squares, as I mentioned there in the middle of East Hill on 104th. The road diets you can see downtown, and the orange triangles for those access control projects on Canyon, and then at the north end on 108th. So now let's talk systemic projects. So, this signal improvement project would add reflective backplates, which make signal heads easier to see and you can see that in the two photos here. On the left, you have signal heads without back plates, and then on the right, you have signal heads, with reflective, that yellow reflective border, which really shows up at night. If you've seen those around the city, we have those in a couple spots. So we would add those and also add through signal heads at these larger intersections. So right now, many roads with 3 lanes in each direction have 2 signal heads for those 3 traffic lanes, which meets national standards. But we want to add signal heads to improve not only the target value for drivers, but also make it easier to see around large vehicles, or if you're following a large vehicle, so you always have a signal head in view. And so those locations I'll show on a map later, but they're mostly along state routes, SR99, Pack Highway, West Valley Highway in the Valley, 104th, 108th, SR 516, and then 212th Street. So many locations on those corridors. Another systemic project is horizontal curve signage. And so this would be a consultant-led study, first of all, a ball bank study where they drive every curve in the city several times and record a ball bank reading, basically, which is just the degree of curvature and the g-forces that result. And that consultant would recommend signage for each curve, including advisory speeds. And so, and the project would also then install those signs. So here's the map of those signal improvements. The curve signage is truly citywide, and so it's nearly impossible to map. We can see those 5 corridors. So that's all the slides I have. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Great presentation. A lot of work's going on, too. And what a process to go through and try to get some of that grant funding, so really appreciate that. And that's a yearly thing that you guys go through? Or
years.
Every 2 years. Okay, great. Council member, any question for Erik? He must have did a good job, or they're hungry, one of the two. So,
thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, 1 second.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to weigh in and say thank you to Public Works, specifically the transportation team. You guys are amazing at bringing grant funding to this city. I think that it is might be lost on our residents how much work it is to get the information and the data put together to get those grants, and then how many projects just would not happen if it weren't for all of that work that you all are doing. So I just want to say thank you so much to the whole team for bringing those dollars into Kent. It truly makes our residents' lives better.
Thank you very much.
Well said, Mayor. Okay, we're going to end on that note. Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And we'll adjourn at 7. We will adjourn and we'll reconvene at 7.